Okay, alright. Let's start by explaining GraphQL. From the docs, GraphQL is a query language for APIs and a runtime for fulfilling those queries with your existing data. To simply put, GraphQL is an open source data query language for APIs. It's why you have QL in its name, which stands for query language. GraphQL provides a complete and understandable description of data in your API. It gives clients the power to ask for exactly what they need and nothing more. It also makes it easier to evolve APIs over time. Here's what a typical request looks like with the REST architecture. Here we're using the Rick and Morty REST API. The URL is displayed on the screen and you'll also find it in the video's description. This is what we're going to be building in this tutorial. We'll be using the GraphQL version of the Rick and Morty API. Now look at what we have in our React app. There's a list of 20 characters with the information name like we have for Morty Smith, the status, whether the character is alive or dead, the species for Morty Smith is human, there's the last known location, and there's also the images. Back to our API request, here's what we have. First of all, we're getting the info property, which contains an object we don't need for our app. Inside the result property, we have data for all 20 characters, and each character object has ID, name, status, species, type, gender, origin, and you see other properties we don't need for our app. With the REST API, we can also add queries. Like we've seen in the info part of the data, there's a total of 671 characters, and right now we only have page 1, which contains 20 characters. What if we want page 2? We can come over to the URL and a question mark for our queries. Next, we have pages equal to 2. And look at that. This is page 2 with the next 20 characters. So this is from 21 to 40. And if we want to fetch for page 3, we have a different URL. Page 4, same thing. With GraphQL, instead of having multiple URLs and endpoints, we have just one. And we can just pass in the queries we want. For example, the page number right here. We pass that as a variable. So this is we're trying to get all the characters, and then we have page as 3. That means I want to get page 3. And if you remember from the REST API request we just made, the data we want is inside results. So we can avoid fetching this info. We just want results. And inside our results, we can decide that, oh, we want just the name to come with our data. So we want just the characters with their names and nothing else. You see that we're also getting suggestions. And we click the play button to send our requests, and look at that. We have a data, and then we have characters and straight to results. And for the results, we have just the characters with their name. So this is Big Boobed Waitress, Big Head Morty, Big Morty, and all that and all that. So I'm gonna make this bigger. We can decide that we want just the name and something else. Now, how do we know what is inside of this GraphQL API? How do we know what we want? We come over to the docs section of this API. So by the right hand side, you see docs. You click on it, and we can now see what's inside of characters. Inside of characters, you see that the first thing we see is the arguments. So page here, and then filter for character filter. This documentation is auto-generated with GraphQL, so you don't need to do any extra work to get this documentation. Right here, you see the argument we use for page as 3. We can see that in the docs. And inside of the docs, we can also decide that we want to see what's inside of results. Remember, we have info for the information about how many characters are there in total and all that. And then there's results. So we want to see what's inside of results. We click on that and look at what we have here. ID, name, status, species, type. We can then choose to get all of them or just a few of them. So another thing that we have here is IntelliSense with the GraphQL client. So you hit Control and Space key on your keyboard, and look at that. We get the suggestions right here for us, and we can just click. So, oh, I've already used name. Let's use something else. Right now we have name. We also want to know if they're alive or dead. So name, status. We want with type. So we click on the run button, and we have that. So these are characters and the results: name, status, type. Big Boobed Waitress, alive, and type. There's nothing for the first one. Big Head Morty, status unknown, type human with giant head. Now, another thing that's really amazing is we can arrange this however we want. So if we want the type to come before the status, we do this. If we want we run this and we have name, type, and status. If we want the status to come before the name, we arrange it so we get our data the way we want it: status, name, type. And we can decide to add more and use all of the different fields right here. So there's the image, which is going to return the image URL. This is close to what we have for our Rick and Morty application. Now you can see why GraphQL is a flexible and efficient choice for data manipulation. You can get exactly what you want. You don't underfetch and you don't overfetch. Underfetching means that with the REST architecture, many times you have to make multiple API requests to different endpoints, even when we need related data. With GraphQL, you can see that we have only one endpoint, only one route, and we have control over how we get and fetch our data. If you've worked with the REST architecture before, you know that it utilizes the get, post, delete, put, and patch HTTP verbs. GraphQL uses queries and mutations, which are mostly sent via the post verb. I don't see this as an advantage or disadvantage, just a difference. And we'll talk about queries and mutations in a bit. Now, GraphQL is a really cool technology and a revolutionary way of thinking about data. That said, I don't think the REST architecture is going away, at least not anytime soon. So it's not a question of whether GraphQL is going to replace REST. It's been around for a while and that hasn't happened yet. So both methods of data handling can and are definitely coexisting. Before we start building our app, let's dive deeper into GraphQL queries like what we've just seen. And I'll be explaining queries and I'll be explaining mutations. So what are queries? You can think of queries as a GET request in the REST API architecture. We use queries to fetch data from our GraphQL server and to structure that data, like we have here. To write a GraphQL query, we start with the left opening curly brace and close it with the right curly brace. Now inside of a curly brace, we have characters. So these are the different fields inside of our GraphQL query. Each field can have arguments. So if there's an argument made available for results, we're going to see it here when we open the parentheses and hit Control and the space key. Right now, we don't get to see anything. So we don't need arguments for the results field. Now for characters, inside of characters, we have two arguments. There's the page. So remember, Control and the space key, you get to see what's inside of it. So there's the page argument and there's the field argument. Now the page argument, look at this. You can see the page argument. If you look below the divider, there's int, which specifies the type for the page. So this is telling us that the type for this page argument is integer. That means that if we have page here, we can do this 3. We can write this. Look at this red line by the left end. That means that there's an error, and when we hover on 3, we can see the error here. Argument page has invalid value 3, expected type int. So what we can do instead is have the integer, and look at that. So GraphQL helps us with error handling. That is really amazing. And that's for page. This is page 3 right now. We can decide that we want page 1 or page 2. And if we remove this, so we can decide to work without this variable. By default, we get page 1. So that's also specified in the API. And if you want to see how to build a GraphQL API, I probably have a course on it in my YouTube channel. If not now, maybe later. But if you don't find anything there, you can request in the comment section below, or check out other amazing YouTube channels for GraphQL API tutorial. But I should have that. Now we have characters right here. Remember, we want page. We can run this and we'll still get we'll get page 1. So this is it. This is page 1 with the first 20 characters, and then one page. So we do that. Now inside of characters, we have results. Right, remember we're skipping the info part. We're going straight to results, and inside of results we have status, name, type, image. Remember I've shown you how this works. Control and space, you can see the different fields that you can input right here. Also with the documentation, you click on docs, you get to see all you need. Amazing, right? Now what about mutations? See, we use queries to fetch data. We use mutations to modify data. That's why it's named mutation, to mutate. Think of mutations like the put, patch, post, and delete methods. So we use mutations to update, insert, or delete data. And the syntax for mutations is similar to that of queries. This GraphQL API does not let us mutate, so we can't mutate right now, but this is what mutation, the syntax for mutation looks like. You have mutation before the curly brace, and then what you want to mutate. Now the fields you want to mutate are going to be inside of this parenthesis, so page and then the value for page. Send that to the database and then modifies it there. We also get to see what we are receiving back and how we want it to be returned back to us. But for a React application, we are going to be working with just queries. Now let's start building our Rick and Morty Character app. All right, let's start building an application. We're going to be using create React app to set up our app, and to do that, on a terminal inside of your directory of choice, here I'm using my projects directory, you run the command npx create react app, and I have the name of my application as Rick and Morty React GraphQL. So we run that and we have a new React application. Next, we're going to open it up in our IDE or text editor of choice. I'm using WebStorm, and to do that, I'm going to run WebStorm and the name of the folder. So in this case is Rick and Morty React GraphQL. Nice, that is also successful. This is a Rick and Morty React GraphQL app opened in a WebStorm. And first of all, we have the readme part of the React application. Okay, inside of our project directory, you can see we have the src directory, which contains the app.css file, index.css, app.js, app.test.js. Let's start by removing the different files we're not going to be needing. So we delete this. WebStorm is warning us that this is being used, so we're going to visit that later. We don't want to use the test file right now. All these are important. You don't have to do them you don't have to delete them in yours. I'm just deleting them so that you can see clearly what we're doing. All right, so we have the warning, and we're deleting all these that we're not going to be using right now. Also, the test setup, remember, testing is important. Index of CSS, are we going to be needing this? I doubt that. Let's remove this. So we'll be using Bootstrap for our styling. So let's delete this. Now you can see that we have just app.js and index.js. Cool. Inside of our app.js file, remember we've deleted the logo and the app.css file, so we remove that too. And one thing I want us to do is use arrow functions throughout our application. So we're going to convert this function to an arrow function, and to do that, look at this light bulb that gets shown when you click inside the function keyword. You click on it and you can see right here, convert to variable holding arrow function. When we do that, we have const app, and that is an arrow function. We don't have a logo, so we're going to remove line 4. Actually, we want to remove line 3 to line 16. Okay, we have a clean app component, and I don't like working with semicolons in my JavaScript applications, so I'm going to remove that too. We save this, and to make sure that our React application is running, go over to the npm section of WebStorm and double click start. If you're not using WebStorm, you can do this with the terminal. So on your terminal, you run npm start, and that should get you started. Now we click on this run button at the bottom of our application to see the result of our start script. Okay, we have a module not found, or index.css, and this is an error from the index.js file. Oh, we've not gotten there yet. Okay, so we go back to our projects explorer and index.js. Okay, so remove this index.css. We're going to remove the report web vitals too, since we've deleted that. We still have one error, and that's when we scroll down, we can see report web vitals is not defined. Okay, we can close our project pane and make this bigger. So remember, no semicolons in my JavaScript apps. I've configured my WebStorm to automatically remove these semicolons. So in case you see that happening as we build the application, that's just me and WebStorm working. All right, now our application is successfully being run on localhost 3000. Let's go check it out. This is localhost 3000, and of course it's a blank screen. Let's put something inside of app.js to be sure that it's working correctly. So h1 hello Rick and Morty, and back to our app. Awesome. So our React application is working fine. Now let's see how to set up GraphQL in our React app. Alright, if you're using WebStorm, there's the GraphQL plugin that's going to make your life really easy. So you come over to the WebStorm option at the top navigation, click on Preferences, and inside Preferences, you go over to the plugin section and search for GraphQL. Right now, we have the JS GraphQL plugin visible, and I have mine already installed. When you click on the install button, you click the apply button and okay, you'll notice that there's a GraphQL button on the button navigation that has appeared. Now when you click on this GraphQL button, see what we have here. Default project wide schema, endpoints, no endpoints available in the default schema. So what do we want to do now? You click on this plus button to add a schema configuration. A GraphQL schema is a description of the data we want to request from a GraphQL API. So we're going to add this in the root directory, this Rick and Morty React GraphQL app. You click on OK. And yes, we do want to add this one to Git. Now we can see that a .graphql config file has been created for us. Inside of our GraphQL config file, we have name, untitled GraphQL schema. So let's name this as our Rick and Morty GraphQL schema. Okay. We can also give the space there. And the next thing we want to change is this URL value on line 7. For our URL, we'll be using an environment variable. We don't have duplicate strings because we'll need this in the GraphQL config file. We'll also need this in our application. So inside the SRC directory in our app.js, when setting up GraphQL, we'll also need that GraphQL URL. And remember our GraphQL API, that's the Rick and Morty API.com/GraphQL URL right here. We copy this and we want to create an env file. So we'll do this in the root directory again. Right click here, new file, and .env. We don't want to add our env variables to Git. Now inside of our env file, we're going to name our variable React app API URL. So this is React app and API URL. For our create React app application to see our environment variables, we need to prefix them with React app. Now this is equal to the URL we just copied. Look at that. Back to our GraphQL config file, we can now use this environment variable. To do that, we still have a double quotes for string and then the $sign. Next, we have our curly brace. Inside of our curly brace, we have env as environment variable and then the name of our environment variable, React app API URL. And that's it for our URL. Next, you see this play button by the left. You click on it, and this is going to generate a GraphQL schema. And we're going to add this to Git. If you're not using WebStorm, if you're using some other text editor, you might not be able to do this. But this is not totally necessary to work with our React app. That means that you don't need to do this to follow along in this course. Doing this is going to make your life really easy, because from this schema file, our GraphQL plugin and WebStorm is going to know everything that our GraphQL API is expecting. So you can see that there's a type character, the description for the created fields, time at which the character was created in the database episode, and all this. So WebStorm is going to use this schema.graphql file to provide auto completion, suggestions, and intelligence for our GraphQL code. And you'll see how that works in a bit. Okay, to begin our setup, we'll come back to the GraphQL official website and scroll down to the Get Started button. Click on it so that we're now in the Getting Started section. Now over here, we scroll down. We want to look for GraphQL client. So this is for the clients. We have Apollo client. Now this is a powerful JavaScript GraphQL client designed to work well with React, React Native, Angular 2, or just plain JavaScript. What we're going to do now is click on this Apollo client, and this is how we're going to make GraphQL work in a React app. Apollo client is a comprehensive state management library for JavaScript that enables you to manage both local and remote data with GraphQL. So with the Apollo client package, we don't need another state management, so it handles that for us. let's click on this get started button, and we can see the setup right here. We have npm install at Apollo client and GraphQL. Now the Apollo client package contains virtually everything you need to set up Apollo client. It includes the in-memory cache, local state management, error handling, and a React-based view layer. Then we also have the GraphQL package. This package provides logic for passing GraphQL queries. So these are the only two npm packages we're going to need for our application. We click on the copy button to copy this. Now back to IDE. Inside of WebStorm and right inside our terminal, we want to paste the command we just copied. And this is going to install the Apollo client package and GraphQL. Alright, we have that successfully installed. We can close the terminal and open the Project Explorer over to the package.json file. See that we have two new dependencies, the Apollo/client dependency and the GraphQL package. Alright, so both of them are now available for us. We can close this and also close our m file and the schema.graphql file. Go over to the index.js file. This is where we want to start testing out GraphQL. Okay, to use the Apollo client in our React app, we're going to start by importing the Apollo client from the Apollo client package. So this is imports, and we have Apollo client. We also need the in-memory cache. This helps us cache our data. Let's declare a variable named client, and this is equal to a new instance of the Apollo client. And we have an object as its argument. Inside of our object, we start with URI. So this is the GraphQL API URL. Remember, we have this in the environment variable. So that's going to be process.env.react app API URL. So WebStorm suggests that for us. And we also need the cache, and this is the new in-memory cache. All right, that's it. To make our first query, we can come over to line 11 and type client.query. And this is a method, so we have a parenthesis, and inside of this parenthesis we have an object argument. Next, the query property, and this is where we write our query. Remember, we've explained queries, something like what we have here right now. Inside of the query property is where we write our query, and to write our query we need GQL so that Apollo knows that this is a query. When we click this, WebStorm is going to import that for us inside of the Apollo client import. So this is GQL right here. Now we first write GQL and then the backtick. We can go ahead and write a query now. We start a query with the query keyword. So this is query and the name of a query. So we want to name our query get all characters. Now you see that WebStorm knows this is the GraphQL code we're writing. That's why you get the syntax highlighting and suggestions. Inside of our get all characters query, we want to copy this query we have right here in our GraphQL client. So copy that and paste it here. Now, if we were to write this ourselves, we're still going to get suggestions. That means that if we start typing characters, we see that WebStorm suggests this for us from our schema config file. Remember that file we generated here? So this is where we get all that from. So characters, and inside of our characters, control and space, you see that we have results. And inside of results, what do we want? Control and space, created, and gender, image, location, name, and all the rest. For our application, here's what we're going to be needing. We'll need the ID of the user, we'll need the name, we'll need the image, we'll need the status, we'll also need species, and we need the location. So inside of location, see that this is being highlighted right now, which means there's a sub selection that's expected for location. And to specify a sub selection, we have another curly brace. Inside of location, you can hit Control and space to see what's expected of us. There's created, dimension, ID, name, residence, and type. We need the name of the location, and that's it. Now you can also see that the query is being highlighted as an error because this returns a promise. So right here we have a .then and results. We can log this to the console. So console.log results. When we save this, go over to a browser and the console. Now we expect to see our query result, but what we have here is undefined. To troubleshoot this, the first thing we're suspecting is our React app API URL. So let's log that to the console. I have log here and process.env dot React app API URL. So back to a browser, we reload, and look at that. That returns undefined. This is because we just created an M file and added that variable to it, but our app has been running all along. So to get our M file as part of the React build, we have to rerun our application. So whenever you modify the environment variables, you need to restart your app so that that gets added to the React app build. So we restart this and see what we have. All right, that is done. Now let's refresh. Look at this. First of all, we have the M variable, that's the Rick and Morty API.com/GraphQL, and we have our data. There's also a very easy way to do this with WebStorm. That is, if we want to test out a query, we can remove line 11 and close the terminal. So this is the query we have right now, from characters to line 25. That's from line 14 to line 25. We can test this out in a WebStorm using the GraphQL plugin. So you click on this GraphQL plugin at the bottom navigation, and you double click anywhere inside this section or window. Now what we want here is a new GraphQL scratch file. So this is for query and mutation testing. Click on that and look at that. We have a scratch file. Inside of a scratch file, you see that we have a query and the scratch query. What we're going to do is copy this characters query from line 14 to 25. And then we paste it inside of the scratch query. So look at that. Now we have this. We click on this play or run button at the top of the file, and that executes a GraphQL query. Look at that. We have a query result. So this is exactly what we just saw in our console. Data, characters, and for each of the character we have results: ID, name, status, location. For character 2, same thing, 3, 4, and until 20. All right, so that's how to get this done in WebStorm. We can now close our scratch1.graphql file. This can work well, but right now we're not using the full powers of the Apollo client. We can use Apollo client, its state management system, cache, and all that, so that whenever data is updated in our store, our application also gets updated. So if data changes, if we receive new data from our GraphQL API, that shows up in our app too. Now we can do this using the Apollo provider. That means that we're going to wrap our application in the provider, and this will make it easy to bind queries to our UI and update it automatically as new data is fetched. Before we do that, let's take line 13 to 26. That's the get characters query. We want to put this in the separate JavaScript file so that we can then export it and import it wherever we need it. So what we're going to do is come over to the Project Explorer, and we're going to create a new JavaScript file named queries. We can store all our queries inside of this file. First of all, we'll paste what we just copied, and we have this as const get all characters equal to a query. Remember that we need GQL for this. So GQL, and then the backtick. We're also going to end it with the backtick. All right, we have GQL imported for us. The next thing we're going to do is export get all characters. Oh, remember this is a JavaScript variable, so it's good to use camel casing. We have G with small letter instead of the capital letter, and then we have get all characters. With this, we can define as many queries as we want inside of this file and export them and use those queries anywhere in our application, so we don't have to rewrite this every time we need it. Now back to the index.js file, we're going to remove line 11 to 13 as we don't need that anymore. Instead, we'll be wrapping our app inside of the Apollo provider. So you want to put this at the top level of your application so that all other components are going to be inside the provider. With this, every component can access the GraphQL data. Now this is our Apollo provider, and we have the client prop, which is going to be equal to our client variable we declared earlier. So right here from line 6 to line 9. Nice, and that's it. We've successfully set up GraphQL with our React application. Let's see how to query our GraphQL API and get data inside of the app component. Right inside of our app component, we want to start by importing the useQuery hook from the Apollo client package. So this is line 1, import useQuery from the Apollo/client package. Now the useQuery hook makes it easy to query our GraphQL API. We don't need to do much work with this hook. First of all, let's wrap this return JSX inside of a curly brace, and then we want to return this separately. So return and move this up. All right. Next, we'll make sure our app is properly indented, and that's it. Inside of our app function, we can now use the use query hook. So first of all, we have const on line 4. We have an empty line after line 4 too, and loading, error, and data is equal to use query. Now inside of this use query function, we're going to pass in our query as an argument. Remember the name of our query, get all characters. And that's it. We have it imported for us on line 2. Nice. So this is the use query hook. This is all we need to do to query data. We write out this line 5, and our use query hook is going to return these variables. We have loading, we have error, and we have data. Loading is going to indicate the status of our request. So if loading is true, we can do something with the application. If there's an error, the value of error is going to be true, and then if there's data, that's going to be inside of the data variable. Now we can use loading right on line 7. Here's what we're going to do. If loading, return, and let's return a p tag with loading. And if there's an error, return a p tag to and error. We might want to return the error message during development. So this is error and dot message. Let's save this and go over to our browser. We reload, and look at that, loading. This is not too visible, so let's set up styling for our application. We're going to be using Bootstrap, so we don't do any work regarding styling. That'll help us focus on the functionality of our application, how GraphQL works, and how it works with React. So let's add Bootstrap 5 to our React application. To set up Bootstrap, we'll come over to the Bootstrap 5 homepage, and I'll leave a link to this website in the description of this video. Now we're going to be using CDN because that's the easiest way to set up Bootstrap in our application. So we'll copy this, and this is all we need. Back to our React app, open up project and navigate to the public directory and index.html. Inside of index.html, we're going to paste this anywhere here. So let's do this before the title tag. We have link, and then we have a Bootstrap CDN code. Now in WebStorm, you can download this library, and when you download this library, you're going to get suggestions, IntelliSense, and auto completion for your Bootstrap code. You'll also get the Bootstrap documentation in the different tooltips that pop up when you hover on any class. Now it says that we've successfully downloaded the Bootstrap CDN library. Back to our app.js component, we're going to wrap our return GSS code in an empty fragment tag. So let's move line 14 to 16 inside of this fragment code. And this is so that we can have multiple child tags. What we want on line 12 is a header tag. And inside of a header, we have this h1, hello, Rick and Morty. So let's move this to line 13. And we can now remove line 15 to 17. We'll have another div there later on, but right now let's start the h1 tag. So this is class name, and inside of a class name attribute, we want text center. Oh, right now we're supposed to be getting the suggestions for Bootstrap, but we're not doing that yet. And that's because before now I've installed Bootstrap in WebStorm. So it's disabled by default for this project. To enable it, you hit Command or Control Shift A on your keyboard and type in libraries. So this is going to take you to all the libraries you have for your project. Look at this. Bootstrap right now is unchecked. So we can check it by clicking on this box and apply. Then you click OK. All right. Right now we're supposed to be getting the suggestions. Let's try this again. This is text. Okay. Text center. Look at that right there. And we also want to give this a margin of 5. One of the reasons I like Bootstrap 5 is that it has these utility classes. So you can see that M5 here represents margin. If we hit Command or Control and click on M5, you see what's inside of this M5 class, margin of 3 REM. All right. We also want to change the heading to Rick and Morty GraphQL app. The next thing we want is div with class name of row, And inside of this div is where we want all the character cards. So all the character cards here. Let's see what we have so far. All right, look at that, Rick and Morty GraphQL app. Now, before we move on, let's go back to the finished version of the application so that we'll see exactly what we're about to build. Okay, this is what our finished app looks like. We're going to have a cards component for each of these character cards. And the character card is going to have an image, the name of the character, the status, a last known location, and also the species. So here, human. Do we have an alien? Yeah, alien Morty is an alien, obviously. Okay, let's go back to our application and create a cards component. Back to WebStorm, we open the project explorer and we can close this public directory. Inside of our src directory, we create a new JavaScript file and we name this card. We're going to name this card.js. So that's it right there. Add this to Git. And inside of our card.js file, we want to create a new component. And to easily generate a functional component in React, we can just type in RSC. That stands for React Stateless Component. You hit enter and look at that. We have a new card component. And it's also exported on line 9 as card. Now, our card component is going to be expecting a prop. We want to make a GraphQL API request inside of the app.js file and then call the component right here on line 16. So we'll call the component there and pass the data to it as a prop. And we're going to name our prop character. So this is it, character. Now, what are we returning? Bootstrap makes creating cards easy. So right inside of line 3, we have class name and Bootstrap has the card class. We also want to give it a width of 25. So right inside of our card, we can now type each card here. And we save this. Back to our app.js file and on line 16, we're going to loop through our data and return cards for each character. So this is what I mean. This is the data variable, right? This contains the data we get from GraphQL. Loading tells us the status of our fetch request. So that's if that's true or false. There's the error variable and there's the data variable. So if a fetch request is successful, this data is going to contain our characters. If we come back to the GraphQL pane on the bottom navigation, you see that our result has this. First of all, we have the data. That's the data you can see right here. And inside of data, we have characters. And inside of characters, we have results. So data.characters.results. That's what we want. Now, right on line 16, we want to do this. Data. And then we use the optional chaining so that this only happens when data is available. Remember, initially, there's no data because loading is still set to true. So our data is still being fetched. There's no data until loading is set to false and our data has been fetched successfully. That's when we have data. So at first there's no data. That's why we're using the optional chaining, the question mark before the full stop. Now data.characters, this is only going to happen if there's something in data. Data.characters, I hope that's the correct spelling, characters. And we also want to do optional chaining here just in case. And we have dot results. So look at that, dot results. Now we're going to map through this, and for each character we want to return the cards component. Let's take this to the next line and we create a new line so that we have an empty line 17, and we want the card component. So this is card, and remember we have the character prop which is going to be equal to this character. Then we can close this. React is going to warn us about the unique key prop. So what we're going to do is provide that prop, which is going to help React probably render all these mapped children. So this is key, and this is why we got the character ID. So since the character ID is unique, we have the value of key as character.id. Now that's it. See that the class name on line 16 is row. We're going to use that to do our Bootstrap styling. Also on line 3, WebStorm has helped us import the card component. All right, now we can go over to the card component, but first of all, back to our browser to see what we have so far. This is our browser, and you can see our GraphQL application is coming to life. Each card here, oh, we made a typo. Let's quickly change that. So this is each card here. We're going to remove it anyway. So that's it. Each card here, each card here, each card here, and we have 20 cards. Let's start styling the cards and giving them information. We can also log character to the console now to see what's inside of it. So this is character. Back to our browser, we inspect this, and here's our console. So look at, for each character we have all this data. Now we can use that in a card component. Now inside of a card component, we can remove the console.log statement online too, and we'll start with the image. So this is the img tag, and we have the src prop, which is going to be equal to character.image. Remember, that's what we have as the result of our GraphQL query. So this is it, character.image. Right here is Rick and Morty API.com/API character avatar and the JPEG image URL. Alright, so that's character.image. We have the class name as card img top, and we have the alt attributes. For our alt attributes, we'll have the value character, and that's it for img tag. Next, we have the div tag, and this has a class card body. With div.cardBody, I can automatically generate the div tag with class of cardBody in WebStorm, and that's when I click the tab button. So look at that, div with class name of cardBody, and this is going to contain the body of our card. First of all, we have h5, and inside h5 we have class name as card title. So class name card title. We also have the css utility class for margin bottom. We want that to be 0, and this is the name of our character. So this is going to be character.name, the character.name, and we have that. Next, we have the p tag, and class name for our p tag is card text. So this is card-text, and for our card text, we have the character.status. That's whether the character is alive or dead, and we have the character species, so human or alien or something else. So that's character.species. So that's it. Next, we have the h6 tag, and this is for the last no location. So we'll give this a class name of class subtitle. So class name as card subtitle. Remember, I've done this before, so I already spent a lot of time getting this to look good or to look proper. And we have last no location right here. All right, lastly, we have the p tag, and this has a class name which is equal to card text, and then character.location.name. This is really nice, the suggestions we're getting. Remember, WebStorm knows all this from the GraphQL schema file that has already been generated. Now we can save this and go back to our application. Look at that. We can multi GraphQL app, and we have characters. So first of all, we have Rick Sanchez, alive human, last no location, Earth, Morty Smith, and all are 20 characters. Alright, now what if we want to fetch data with arguments like the page number, which we did earlier? If we want page 2 instead of page 1, what do? Let's go back to the Project Explorer and the queries.js file. Now, one thing I just remembered is that the Apollo recommended way to name queries is using all uppercase and the snake case. So let's right click and refactor this so that takes effect and everywhere it's being used in the application. I want to name this get and all underscore characters. This is their recommended way. You see this method used in their examples. If you go to the Apollo documentation, you're gonna see it. You're gonna see queries named this way. And this is just to help you differentiate queries from normal variables. Now, the next we want to do is click refactor, and you can see our refactoring review. So these are the different places where get all characters variable is being used. Now, do refactor. This is going to immediately take effect in every part of our application. So back to the app.js file, you can see right here we have get all characters, all uppercase, and snake case or underscored case. All right. Now, inside of the queries.js file, to use variables like the page number, what we're going to do is create a new line after GQL and the backtick. Then we'll name a query. Remember how we wrote it initially when we were not working with the Apollo provider yet. So we have query, and then we're going to name this character. And inside of a character, this is how we specify variables. So first of all, we have the $sign and the name of our variable. I think the name of our variable is page. Let's test this out. So what we're going to do is go over to the project section and we'll look for our GraphQL scratch file. This should be scratch2.graphql. And for characters, we have the parenthesis. And inside of this parenthesis, we hit Control and space key. Okay, you can see that. So these are the two arguments we can pass in, the filter argument and the page argument. All right. So let's go back to our queries.js file. And this is named page. Remember, it's an integer. So this is int for int. Now, when we hover on page, look at that, unused variable page. Next, we're going to take this opening curly brace to the query character line. And then we have a characters. Let's indent this. Okay, we also want to do the same for line 4. And something is off. We'll figure that out later. All right, so this is the page variable. Let's use that inside of our query. Next, inside of our queries on line 5, we have another parenthesis. This time around, this is where we want to use the page variable we just declared on line 4. So right on line 5, inside of the parenthesis, we have page, and this page is equal to the page variable. So that's it, the one with the $sign. So page, look at that. So this is how GQL works. First of all, we declare the variable here and its type is integer, and then we use the variable in the query. So this is characters and this is page with the value as the page variable on line 4. Now that we've done that, we can come back to the app.js file where we're using the get all characters query. Right on line 6, inside of the use query hook function call, we have a comma after the get all characters query and then an object. So this is the second argument of our use query function call. And what we have inside of our object is the variables property. So variables is where we declare the variables. Now, what variable are we expecting here? We expect page. And for page, this can now be equal to anything we want. So if we want page 2, you write page 2 right there. If we want page 3 right there on line 7. Let's save and test it out. We save that and run. Look, we have an error. So remember our error message, error, response not successful, receive status code 400. What's our error? We come over to the problems button in the bottom navigation of our app and go over to project errors. Look at what we have here inside of the queries.js file, unknown type int. So let's click on this. So look at this. We're using int with small letter instead of int with capital letter. So right now this is recognized. So that is why this was initially highlighted. And you can see the error notification on the top right of a file. So one error. Now let's change this to int and try again. All right, look at that. We have a GraphQL app, Rick and Morty, with page 3 of our GraphQL API data. And oh, this is big boobed waitress. And big boobed waitress is alive. This is big head Morty, big Morty, and all are 20 other characters on page 3. This is amazing. And that's it for our GraphQL app with React. Remember, our app is wrapped in the Apollo provider, so we can access this API data from anywhere in our application. And since this data is already cached, the next time we make this API request in our app, Apollo does not need to go to the server anymore to get this data. This is really cool. So far, we've seen what GraphQL is all about. We've explained GraphQL. We've talked about queries, mutation, the GraphQL clients. We've seen how to set up a React application with GraphQL. We've talked about Apollo, configuring GraphQL, the Apollo provider, and we've seen how to use variables in our GraphQL queries. We've seen how to use GraphQL with WebStorm, and that's it for now. If you want to learn how to build GraphQL APIs, I probably have that in my channel. If not, come back later. Any other thing you want to know, please leave a comment in the comment section below. Do me a favor, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and turn on that notification bell so you get to see when next I release an amazing tutorial like this one. All right, see you in my next video.